The boardroom fell silent as James Carter leaned forward in his leather chair, his fingers drumming against the polished mahogany table. The quarterly meeting had taken an unexpected turn when Dr. Thompson presented the latest patient satisfaction reports. The numbers were abysmal. If you love your family and want to listen to amazing and shocking stories, click on subscribe and avoid 20 years of bad luck in your life. Mr. Carter, we've received 47 formal complaints in the last month alone, Dr. Thompson said, adjusting his glasses. Patients report extended wait times, missing medical records, and in some cases, unauthorized changes to their treatment plans. A woman at the far end of the table raised her hand. Sir, I have a letter here from Mrs. Henderson. Her husband was scheduled for a routine bypass surgery, but somehow disappeared from our system. When we finally located his records, they showed he had been transferred to another facility, except no one authorized this transfer. James straightened his tie, his mind racing. This was his father's legacy. Carter Memorial Hospital had been the city's most trusted medical facility for 3 decades. Now, something was clearly wrong. What about staffing? James asked. Are we properly equipped during night shifts? The hospital administrator shuffled through her papers. On paper, yes, but we've had reports of unauthorized personnel in restricted areas after hours. James dismissed the meeting with a promise to address these issues personally. But as he sat alone in his office, overlooking the Manhattan skyline, he knew standard procedures wouldn't be enough. He needed to see for himself what happened in his hospital after dark. That evening, James stood in front of his bathroom mirror, barely recognizing himself. He had traded his tailored suit for a worn janitor's uniform from the hospital's supply room. The name tag read Mike. His normally well-groomed hair was hidden under a baseball cap, and he'd grown out his stubble over the past week. Even his own secretary would struggle to recognize him. At 11 p.m., James swiped his newly created maintenance badge and entered through the service entrance. The hospital's atmosphere shifted dramatically at night. The bustling corridors of daytime were replaced by an eerie quiet, broken only by the occasional squeak of his cleaning cart and the distant beeping of medical equipment. He started his rounds on the 3rd floor, methodically pushing his mop across the linoleum floors. The night staff barely glanced at him, just another invisible worker in the hospital's hierarchy. But James noticed things. A nurse and doctor exchanging whispered words before quickly separating when another staff member approached. A security guard speaking urgently into his radio, then hurrying toward the elevator banks. Near midnight, while cleaning outside room 342, an elderly patient grabbed his attention. The man's thin fingers clutched James's sleeve as he passed. Hey, you're new here, the patient whispered, his eyes darting nervously around the dimly lit corridor. Let me warn you about the dark place. James stopped mopping. What dark place? Below, where they take people. The old man's grip tightened. My roommate, Jerry, they said he was being transferred, but I heard him screaming when they took him down there. Before James could press for more details, a night nurse appeared. Mr. Peterson, you should be sleeping. She shot James a suspicious look. And you, there's a spill in the east wing that needs attention. James nodded and pushed his cart away, his mind racing. The patient's words echoed in his head. Where they take people, combined with the missing records and unauthorized transfers mentioned in the meeting, a disturbing pattern was emerging. Something sinister was happening in his hospital, and he was determined to uncover the truth. The next night, James arrived earlier for his shift, hoping to learn more about the hospital's nocturnal operations. In the maintenance break room, he met Frank Martinez, a janitor who'd worked at Carter Memorial for 23 years. Frank was organizing cleaning supplies when James introduced himself as Mike. New guy, huh? Frank said, handing him a fresh batch of cleaning rags. Stick with me tonight. I'll show you the efficient routes. As they walked, Frank lowered his voice, and which areas to avoid. James pushed his cart alongside Frank's. noting how other staff members nodded respectfully at the veteran janitor. Avoid. Are some areas dangerous? Not dangerous exactly. Frank checked over his shoulder before continuing. But weird things happen in this place after dark, especially in the lower levels. He paused by a utility closet, pretending to check his supplies. You know, Dr. Price, tall guy, always wearing that fancy watch. James's heart rate picked up at the mention of Alan Price, his longtime friend and the hospital's chief of surgery. What about him? He's been doing a lot of late-night visits to the old storage areas in the basement. Never used to go down there before. Frank shook his head. Started about 6 months ago. Same time people started talking about missing patients. James kept his expression neutral, though his mind was racing. Alan had been acting strange lately, cancelling their regular golf games and avoiding social events. Missing patients. Keep your voice down, Frank warned. Look, I'm just a janitor, but I've worked here long enough to know when something's off. Last week, I was cleaning near the ICU when I heard 2 doctors talking about a patient in room 517. They were arguing about some transfer that wasn't in the system. They continued their rounds, but James was only half listening to Frank's instructions about proper floor waxing techniques. His thoughts kept returning to Alan Price. What was his friend doing in the basement storage areas? Around midnight, James was mopping the 5th floor when he overheard 2 doctors near the nurses' station. He recognized one as Dr. Sarah Chen, a neurologist. What do you mean you can't find the Rodriguez file? Dr. Chen hissed at her colleague. The patient was scheduled for transfer to Mount Sinai yesterday. That's just it, the other doctor replied, running his hands through his hair. Mount Sinai has no record of the transfer request, and when I checked our system, all of Rodriguez's files were gone. It's like he never existed. This is the 3rd time this month, Dr. Chen muttered. First the Thompson case, then that elderly woman from 402, now this. Something's not right. James pretended to focus on his mopping, but his ears were straining to catch every word. The doctors moved away, their voices fading, but their conversation confirmed his growing suspicions. Later that night, while cleaning the basement corridors, James noticed something odd about one of the walls. The paint was slightly different, newer than the surrounding area. He ran his hand along the surface, feeling a faint draft. Pressing harder, he heard a click. A hidden door swung inward, revealing a narrow passage. James hesitated. The passage wasn't on any hospital blueprint he'd ever seen, and he'd reviewed them all extensively during recent renovation projects. The air from the opening carried a strange antiseptic smell mixed with something metallic. He checked his watch. 2:15 a.m. The basement was deserted at this hour. Taking out his phone's flashlight, James stepped toward the entrance. Just then, footsteps echoed from the main corridor. He quickly pushed the door closed and resumed mopping as 2 security guards walked past. Dr. Price wants extra patrols down here tonight, one guard said to the other. Says we need to keep this area secure at all costs. James waited until their footsteps faded before examining the wall again. The secret entrance was seamless when closed. He never would have noticed it if he hadn't felt the draft. Something was hidden behind that door. Something important enough to require extra security and his friend's personal attention. The following night, James waited until 3 a.m. when the security patrols were at their lightest. He found the hidden door in the basement again, this time prepared with a small wedge to keep it from locking behind him. The passage beyond was narrow and poorly lit, leading to what appeared to be a converted storage area. The first thing that struck him was the organization. Unlike the cluttered hospital basement, this space was immaculate. Metal filing cabinets lined one wall, and expensive medical equipment filled the room. Equipment that should have been logged in the hospital's inventory system. A computer hummed quietly in the corner, its screen dark. James pulled on latex gloves from his cleaning cart and began examining the filing cabinets. Each drawer contained medical records, but something was off. These weren't regular patient files. They were categorized by blood type, age, and organ viability. His stomach churned as he read through a document labeled Acquisition Schedule. The file detailed the procurement of organs from unsuspecting patients. Names he recognized from complaint reports appeared on these lists, along with dates of their disappearances and the prices their organs had commanded on what was clearly a black market. James's hands shook as he pulled out his phone and started photographing documents. The flash was off, but even the screen's dim lights seemed too bright in the darkness. Page after page revealed a sophisticated operation: falsified death certificates, forged transfer papers, and detailed surgical schedules. A notation caught his eye: client paying premium for compatible heart, need type O negative, age 25 to 40, minimal medical history, timeline 72 hours. The date on the document was yesterday. In another cabinet, he found financial records, offshore account numbers, wire transfer confirmations, and payment schedules. The amounts were staggering: millions of dollars flowing through shell companies. Several transactions were initialed AP, Alan Price. James had just opened another drawer when he heard voices approaching from the corridor. He quickly closed the cabinet and looked for a hiding place. The room offered little cover except for a large medical waste container in the corner. The voices grew closer. He squeezed behind the container just as the door opened. The lights flicked on, and 2 sets of footsteps entered the room. The buyers, getting impatient. Alan. James recognized the second voice, but couldn't place it. We promised delivery by Friday. Tell them to wait. Alan Price's familiar voice replied. We can't rush this. That incident last month nearly exposed everything. We need to be more careful about covering our tracks. The board's starting to ask questions. And that new janitor, Martinez, says he's been asking about the basement. Let me worry about the board, Alan said. As for the janitor, have security keep an eye on him. If he becomes a problem, we'll handle it the same way we handled the others. The men moved toward the filing cabinets. James held his breath as Alan opened the drawer he'd just been examining. Someone's been in here, Alan said sharply. These files are out of order. Could be Rodriguez. He was down here earlier updating the schedules. No, Rodriguez is meticulous. This is different. Alan's voice hardened. Check the security cameras. I want to know everyone who's been in this section tonight. And double the patrols. What about Carter? He's been pushing for an internal audit. James is too busy playing golf and attending charity galas to notice what's happening in his own hospital. Besides, he trusts me. That's why this has worked so well for so long. The conversation continued, but James was fighting to stay still. His leg was cramping, and the antiseptic smell was making him dizzy. After what seemed like hours, the men finally left, turning off the lights. James waited 5 more minutes before emerging from his hiding spot. His mind was reeling from what he'd heard. Alan, his friend of 20 years, the best man at his wedding, was running an organ trafficking ring right under his nose, using his hospital, using his trust. He had to get out of there. But as he reached for the door, a new thought stopped him cold. The note about needing a heart within 72 hours. Someone in this hospital was already marked for procurement. An innocent patient was going to die unless he stopped it. James barely slept that morning, haunted by what he'd discovered. By 10 a.m., he was back at the hospital, this time in his business suit, observing the daytime operations with new eyes. Every nurse's whispered conversation, every hurried doctor's exchange now carried sinister possibilities. He had chosen Clara Thompson carefully. Over the past 6 months of reviewing staff records, her name stood out. 15 years as a nurse, perfect attendance, and notably, several filed complaints about irregularities in patient care that had been mysteriously dismissed. James found her in the ICU, checking patient charts. He watched her methodically verifying medications, double-checking dosages. No shortcuts. No rushed signatures. "Nurse Thompson," he said quietly, approaching her station. "Could I have a moment?" Clara looked up, surprise flickering across her face. It wasn't every day the hospital owner wanted to speak with a nurse. "Of course, Mr. Carter." He led her to an empty consultation room, closing the door. "What I'm about to ask you might seem strange, but I need you to be completely honest with me. Have you noticed anything unusual about patient transfers lately?" Clara's hand tightened on her clipboard. "Why are you asking me this?" "Because out of 300 staff members, you're the only one who's filed multiple reports about missing patient records and unauthorized transfers." James leaned forward. "Reports that were buried before they reached my desk." Color drained from Clara's face. She glanced at the door, then back at James. "I can't. Last time I pushed too hard about this, I received a warning letter. Said I was disrupting hospital operations. What if I told you I know about the basement?" James watched her reaction carefully. "About the hidden room." Clara's eyes widened. She set down her clipboard with trembling hands. "How do you?" She stopped, taking a deep breath. "My sister, Laura. She was admitted here 8 months ago. Routine appendectomy." Her voice cracked. "They told me there were complications, that she was transferred to Mount Sinai for specialized care. But when I called Mount Sinai, they had no record of her." James finished. "I kept searching, requesting records, asking questions." Clara's voice hardened. Then the threats started. Pictures of me walking to my car at night. Notes left in my locker suggesting I should be more careful about my accusations. "Why didn't you go to the police?" "I did," they said, "without evidence. It was just a workplace dispute." She laughed bitterly. 2 days later, my apartment was broken into. Nothing taken, just ransacked. The message was clear. James pulled out his phone, showing her some of the photos he'd taken. Clara's hands shook as she swiped through them. These dates, she stopped on one document. This was the day Laura disappeared. Type B positive. That was her blood type. Her voice broke. "They harvested her organs, didn't they?" "I think so," James said quietly. "And they're still doing it. There's another procurement scheduled within the next 48 hours. Clara stood abruptly, pacing the small room. "Dr. Price. It has to be him. He personally handled Laura's case. Insisted on doing the surgery himself, even though it was just an appendectomy." "It's him," James confirmed. "And others. But I need proof that will stand up in court. Documents, witnesses, something concrete." "Why are you telling me this?" "Why trust me?" "Because you never stopped looking for answers, even when it put you at risk." James stood. "I need your help, Clara. But I have to warn you, it's already dangerous, and it's going to get worse." Clara walked to the window, looking out at the hospital grounds. When she turned back, her eyes were steel. "They killed my sister. Used this hospital, a place meant for healing, to murder innocent people." She met James's gaze. "What's the plan?" Before James could answer, his phone buzzed. A text from Alan. "Golf, this weekend. Need to discuss hospital's future." Clara read the message over his shoulder. "He suspects something." "Maybe," James said. "But he just made a mistake. He's getting nervous, which means he might get sloppy." He looked at Clara. "We need to move fast. That procurement they're planning, it's scheduled for Friday. Someone in this hospital right now is marked for death, and we're running out of time." The coffee shop across from the hospital was busy enough that their conversation would blend into the general noise. James sat with his back to the wall, watching the entrance while Clara detailed everything she'd observed over the past months. "It's not just the missing patients," Clara said, her coffee untouched. "Equipment disappears too. Expensive things, ventilators, surgical tools, monitoring equipment. They write them off as broken or obsolete, but they're practically new. For their underground operating room," James confirmed. "I saw some of it last night. They've got a fully equipped surgical suite down there." Clara leaned forward. "After Laura disappeared, I started keeping records. She pulled out a small notebook. Dates, names, patterns. Every patient who vanished had something in common. They were all alone. No family visiting regularly. No one to ask too many questions. James scanned her notes. Except your sister. Laura was their mistake. They didn't know I worked here when she was admitted. Clara's hands clenched. After she vanished, I received this. She slid a folded paper across the table. The note was typed. Tragic accidents happen to nosy nurses and their families. Consider this a professional courtesy. When did this arrive? 2 days after I filed my 3rd complaint. There was a photo with it. Me picking up my nephew from school. Clara's voice shook. I transferred him to a different school the next day. Told my brother-in-law to leave town for a while. James studied the note. This could be evidence. It's not enough. No fingerprints. Standard printer paper. I had a friend in forensics check. Clara glanced out the window at the hospital. But I know where we might find real evidence. The basement room. No, Dr. Price's office. He keeps a private laptop there. Never connects it to the hospital network. I've seen him using it late at night. Always alone. James considered this. Getting into his office won't be easy. He has a private security system installed. I can help with that, Clara said. I have access to the master key card. All nurses do, for emergencies. But we'll only have a short window. Price has a surgery scheduled tonight. Should take at least 3 hours. If we're caught, we're dead anyway, Clara finished. They threatened my family once. I won't give them another chance. That night, the hospital corridors seemed different, more threatening. James was back in his janitor's uniform, pushing his cleaning cart past Price's office for the 3rd time. Clara was at her station, waiting for Price to start his surgery. Finally, her text arrived. He's scrubbing in, moving now. James met her at the service elevator. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she swiped her keycard at Price's door. The light turned green. We have 3 hours at most, she whispered. The laptop's in his desk drawer. They slipped inside, closing the door quietly. The office was immaculate. Everything precisely arranged. James headed for the desk, while Clara watched the door. The drawer was locked. James pulled out a set of pics, a skill from his rebellious college days he never thought he'd use again. 1 minute, 2 minutes, click. The laptop was there, along with her external hard drive. As James reached for them, Clara hissed. Someone's coming. Footsteps approached in the hallway. They froze. The footsteps paused outside the door. A keycard swiped. Hide. Clara mouthed, diving behind a large filing cabinet. James barely made it behind the heavy curtains when the door opened. A security guard entered, sweeping his flashlight across the room. All clear on 2nd floor, he said into his radio. Checking the executive offices now. The beam passed inches from James's shoes. He held his breath. The guard moved methodically through the room, checking corners, looking under the desk. Office secure, he reported. Moving to 3rd floor. They waited until his footsteps faded completely before moving. That was too close, Clara whispered. We need to hurry, James said, returning to the desk. He grabbed the laptop and hard drive, stuffing them into his cleaning cart under some rags. Just then, Clara gasped. Through the office window, they saw Price striding down the hallway, still in his scrubs. He's back early, she hissed. Something must have gone wrong with the surgery. They were trapped. Price was seconds away, and they were in his private office with stolen property. Clara looked at James, real fear in her eyes for the first time. Trust me, she said suddenly, grabbing his arm. And before James could react, she did something that would either save their lives or end them. Clara yanked James into position behind the desk, messed up her hair, and quickly unbuttoned the top of her uniform, just as Price opened the door. When he flicked on the lights, he found his friend's janitor, apparently in a compromising position with a nurse. What the hell is this? Price demanded. Clara burst into theatrical tears. Dr. Price, I'm so sorry. Mike and I, we didn't think anyone would be here. James played along. straightening his uniform awkwardly. "Sorry, sir. Won't happen again." Price's face darkened. "Get out, both of you. And Thompson, report to HR in the morning." They hurried out, James pushing his cart with the hidden laptop. Once they were safely in the service elevator, Clara rebuttoned her uniform, her hands shaking. He bought it. The infamous office romance excuse. "Quick thinking," James said. "Though it might cost you your job, better than costing us our lives." She glanced at the cart. "We need somewhere private to check what's on that laptop." They made their way to the abandoned physical therapy room on the 4th floor. Equipment had been moved out months ago, and it wasn't due for renovation for another week. James pulled out the laptop while Clara watched the door. "It's password protected," James muttered, staring at the login screen. "Try Laura, 8546, Clara suggested. At James's questioning look, she added, "It was my sister's patient number. I saw him type something at length once." The screen unlocked. "How did you?" He used her death to taunt me. Keeping her number as his password would be exactly his style. James opened the files. Spreadsheets, documents, and photos filled the screen. Each folder was meticulously organized by date and procedure type. The evidence was overwhelming. Detailed records of every procurement, payment schedules, buyer information, surgical teams involved. "Look at this." Clara pointed to a folder labeled Next Phase. Inside were plans for expanding the operation to 3 other hospitals, complete with names of corrupted staff members and potential targets. James downloaded everything to a secure drive he'd brought. "This is enough to shut them down. We need to get this to the FBI." "Wait," Clara said, opening another file. "This is tomorrow's schedule." Her face went pale. "James, the target for tomorrow. It's Martinez. Frank, the janitor. They must have realized he was helping you." Clara scanned the document. "They're planning to stage an accident during his shift. Make it look like he fell down the stairs." James felt sick. Frank's only crime had been talking to the wrong janitor. "We have to warn him." "That's not all," Clara continued reading. "There's a whole list here. People who've asked too many questions. My name is on it. So is Dr. Chen's. They're planning to clean house." Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Multiple sets, moving with purpose. Security sweep of all floors. A voice crackled over a radio. "Dr. Price wants everyone found and detained." Clara quickly closed the laptop. They know. The office romance story didn't fool him. "We need to get out of here." James started packing up, but Clara grabbed his arm. "No time. They're too close." She pointed to the old laundry chute in the corner. "That leads to the basement." "The basement? That's their territory." "Exactly. They won't expect us to go there." She was already opening the chute. "It's our only chance." The footsteps grew closer. James could hear doors being opened and closed systematically. They were checking every room, making a split-second decision. James shoved the laptop and drive into his work bag and climbed into the chute after Clara. The metal walls were tight, and the descent was steeper than he expected. They slid down in darkness, trying to control their speed. They landed in a heap of old sheets in the basement laundry room. But before they could orient themselves, a familiar voice spoke from the darkness. "I had a feeling you might come this way." Dr. Price's voice came from behind them as fluorescent lights flickered on. 2 security guards blocked the exit. James instinctively stepped in front of Clara, his work bag heavy with evidence against his back. "Run." James shoved a laundry cart toward the guards, creating chaos in the narrow room. Clara darted left, while James went right, splitting the security team's attention. James sprinted down the dimly lit corridor, his janitor's shoes squeaking on the polished floor. Behind him, he heard Price shouting orders, "Get them, and find that bag." The basement was a maze of interconnected hallways, and James used his week of maintenance work to his advantage. He ducked into a supply closet, breathing hard, listening to running footsteps pass by. His phone vibrated. A text from Clara. Third floor. Records room. Hurry. He waited until the footsteps faded before slipping out. The service elevator was too risky. They'd be watching it. Instead, he found the maintenance stairwell, the one Frank had shown him during training. As he climbed, voices echoed from above. Check every floor. They couldn't have gotten far. The woman went up to ICU. Johnson's pursuing her. What about the janitor? No sign yet. Watch the exits. James paused at the second floor landing, hearing movement above. He needed to reach the third floor, but the stairs were becoming a trap. Through the stairwell window, he spotted the external maintenance ladder. A dangerous option, but his only choice. The metal rungs were slick with evening dew as he climbed. One wrong move meant a 40-foot fall. When he reached the third floor, he had to hang precariously from the ladder, while working the emergency window lock with one hand. Finally inside, James crouched in the darkness of the records room. Clara was already there, hiding behind a row of filing cabinets. "They're everywhere," she whispered. "Price has called in off-duty security. They're sealing off the building. We need to warn Frank," James said. "What time does his shift start?" "In 30 minutes. He always uses the east entrance." James checked his phone. No signal. They must be jamming communications. Footsteps approached. They pressed themselves against the wall as a beam from a flashlight swept the room. The door opened, and a security guard entered, moving methodically between the rows of cabinets. Clara's hand found James's in the darkness, squeezing once. They couldn't stay here. The guard would find them eventually. James looked around desperately for options. The ceiling panels. Standard hospital construction meant a maintenance crawl space above. He nudged Clara, pointing upward. She nodded, understanding. When the guard moved to the far end of the room, they silently shifted one panel, and Clara boosted James up. He reached down to pull her up, just as the guard turned. "Hey!" The shout was followed by the sound of running feet. They replaced the panel just as the guard reached their position. More security poured into the room, but in the ceiling crawl space, James and Clara were already moving carefully across the metal framework. There, in the ceiling, the voice was muffled below them. "Get maintenance up here now." They crawled through the dusty space, trying to move quietly despite the metal beams creaking under their weight. James consulted his mental map of the hospital layout. The crawl space should connect all the rooms on this floor. Suddenly, Clara stopped. "Listen." Through a vent, they could hear Price speaking to someone. "I want this contained. If anyone asks, we had a break-in. 2 thieves posing as staff. No one mentions anything about missing patients or records." "What about the real staff?" another voice asked. "They've seen the search. I've already called the board. As of now, Carter Memorial is in emergency lockdown due to a security threat. No one in or out without clearance." James felt cold. Price was trying to trap everyone inside, including Frank, who was about to walk into a death sentence. "The east entrance," Clara whispered. "We can get there through the security office crawl space. I memorized the patrol schedules. There's a shift change in 10 minutes. It'll be empty." They changed direction, moving as fast as they dared. Below them, chaos continued to unfold as security teams searched room by room. Time was running out. For them, for Frank, and for every patient marked on Price's list. When they reached the security office, they heard a familiar voice through the vent. "Sir Martinez just badged in at the east entrance." James and Clara shared a panicked look. Frank had arrived early. Through the vent, they could see the security monitors showing Frank walking down the east corridor, completely unaware of the danger. "Hold your positions." Price's voice crackled over the radio. "Let him get to the basement stairs." Clara pointed to a ceiling panel near the monitors. If they could access the security system, they might be able to warn Frank. James nodded, understanding her plan. They carefully removed the panel, and Clara lowered herself into the empty office. She moved quickly to the computer terminal, her nursing credentials giving her basic access. James kept watch through the crawl space, monitoring both corridor ends through the ceiling vents. I need to override the security protocols, Clara whispered, fingers flying over the keyboard. If I can access the emergency broadcast system. A window popped up on her screen. Unauthorized access detected. System lockdown initiated. No, 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 Clara muttered, trying to bypass the lockout, but it was too late. Alarms began blaring throughout the hospital, there in the security office. A voice shouted from the corridor. Footsteps thundered toward them. James reached down. Clara, come on. She grabbed one final thing, a radio from the security desk. Before letting James pull her back into the ceiling, they replaced the panel just as guards burst into the office. The system's been compromised, one reported. They were trying to access the emergency protocols. Through the vent, they watched Frank on the security monitor, approaching the basement stairs. He hesitated at the alarm, looking confused. Clara switched on the stolen radio, changing frequencies rapidly. Come on, there. She'd found the maintenance channel. Frank, don't take the stairs. It's a trap. On the monitor, Frank stopped, pulling out his radio. But before he could respond, 2 security guards appeared behind him. Martinez, come with us. Dr. Price wants to speak with you. James grabbed the radio. Frank, run. They're going to kill you. Frank's eyes widened on the screen. He turned to run, but one guard grabbed him while the other reached for his weapon. Suddenly, the lights went out. Emergency generators kicked in, casting everything in dim red light. What happened? Price's voice demanded over the radio. Power grid's down, sir. Someone hit the main breaker. Clara smiled grimly. That wasn't us. She pointed to another monitor showing Dr. Sarah Chen in the basement electrical room. Looks like we're not the only ones fighting back. In the confusion, Frank broke free. The monitors showed him running down the corridor, the guards in pursuit. We have to help him, James said. Wait. Clara was staring at another screen. Look. The monitor showed Price entering his office, moving quickly to his desk. He was gathering papers, shoving them into a briefcase. He's destroying evidence. The laptop, James patted his work bag. We have copies. Not everything. Those papers. Clara's face went pale. That's the drawer where he keeps the surgical schedules. The names of everyone involved. Without those documents, it's just our word against his. The choice was impossible. Save Frank or get the evidence that could bring down the entire operation. Either way, they had only minutes before the security teams found their location. Through the ceiling vent, they heard Frank's voice, closer now, crying out in pain. The guards had caught him. Decide now, Clara said, her eyes meeting James's in the red emergency lighting. Which way? Both, James said firmly. You help Frank. I'll get the documents. They separated at the next junction in the crawl space. Clara heading toward Frank's cries, while James moved toward Price's office. The emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie red glow through the ceiling vents. James positioned himself above Price's office, watching through a vent as his former friend hurriedly stuffed papers into his briefcase. Price's movements were rushed, sloppy, nothing like his usual surgical precision. He was panicking. In his earpiece, Clara's whispered voice came through the stolen radio. I can see Frank. 2 guards. There by the east stairwell. James heard glass breaking below. Price was smashing his office phone. Almost done here. Be careful. Now. Clara's voice was followed by the sound of a crash. Through the security feed, visible on Price's office monitor, James watched as Clara had pushed a supply cart down the corridor, scattering medical supplies everywhere. The guards stumbled, momentarily distracted. Frank, despite his injuries, understood immediately. He bolted through the nearest door, the radiology department. Price looked up at the monitor, cursing. Get Martinez. He knows too much. The moment Price moved toward his office door, James made his decision. He crashed through the ceiling panel, landing hard on Price's desk. Papers scattered everywhere. Price stumbled back, shock replacing his usual composure. James, it's over, Alan. James blocked the doorway, putting himself between Price and the briefcase. "James, you don't understand the things we've accomplished here." Price's hand moved toward his desk drawer. "Don't." James's voice was cold. "I saw the files, the procurement schedules, Laura Thompson, all of them." Price's face hardened. "You were always too idealistic. Do you know how many lives we've saved? Rich, important people who needed organs. The donors were nobodies, street people, illegals. They were human beings. They were inventory." Price lunged suddenly, not for the drawer, but for James's throat. They crashed into the filing cabinet, years of friendship dissolving into desperate violence. Through the radio, Clara's voice crackled. "James, guards heading your way." Price was stronger than James expected. They grappled across the office, smashing into medical awards and framed certificates. Price's hands found James's throat. "I built this program," Price snarled. "While you played golf and attended charity galas, I made this hospital matter." James's vision was darkening when he heard Clara's voice again. "Duck." He drove his knee into Price's stomach and rolled away just as the door burst open. Frank Martinez charged in, swinging a fire extinguisher. Price went down hard. Clara appeared behind Frank, breathing heavily. "Security's right behind us. We need to move." James grabbed the briefcase and his work bag. "The evidence." "Got it." Clara held up her phone, recorded everything Price just said. His confession about the donors. Price groaned on the floor, reaching for his phone. Frank kicked it away. "The guards," Price wheezed, "are busy." Clara smiled grimly. Dr. Chen released all the electronic door locks. The whole hospital's in chaos. Staff are demanding answers. Patients are calling the police. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. "You don't understand." Price tried to stand. "The people behind this, they'll never let you expose them." "Already did." James held up his phone. "Everything's been uploading to multiple secure servers for the past hour. The files, the recordings, all of it. It's over, Alan." Price's face contorted. With surprising speed, he pulled a scalpel from his coat and lunged at James. Clara screamed a warning. Frank moved faster than anyone expected, tackling Price from behind. The scalpel clattered across the floor, leaving a thin red line on James's arm. As they struggled, something fell from Price's coat. A phone, different from his usual one. Clara grabbed it while James helped Frank subdue Price. The phone was unlocked, open to a messaging app. Her hands trembled as she read. "James," her voice cracked. "These messages, they're from Laura." "What?" James looked up, still holding Price down. "She's alive." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "She's been working with them all this time." The messages detailed Laura's role, identifying potential targets, falsifying medical records, coordinating with buyers. She hadn't been a victim. She'd been Price's partner. "Your sister made a smart choice." Price spat blood from his split lip. She understood the opportunity. "Unlike you, Clara, she saw the bigger picture." "Where is she?" Clara's voice was deadly quiet. "Safe, protected, which is more than I can say for you three." Price smiled through bloodied teeth. "You think the police can touch us? We own judges, politicians. The messages are already going out. In an hour, everything will be buried." James checked his phone. No signal. "They're blocking communications again." "Not everything," Frank said. He pulled out a small device from his janitor's uniform. "Maintenance uses a different radio frequency. Short range, but it should reach the police outside." Footsteps thundered in the hallway. The security team had fought through the chaos. They had minutes, maybe seconds. "Clara," James said gently, "we need to move." She stood frozen, staring at the messages from her sister. Years of grief, anger, and betrayal played across her face. Then, with terrifying calm, she turned to Price. "Where is she?" "Clara, please," James started. "No." She showed him the last message. "Everything ready for tonight. The buyers waiting at the usual place." "She's still in the city," Price said smugly. Probably finishing our last transaction. Not that you'll live to see her. The door burst open. Security poured in, weapons drawn. But instead of arresting them, the chief of security looked at Price. "Sir, your orders." Price smiled. "Kill them. Make it look like they attacked me." "I don't think so." A new voice came from behind the security team. Dr. Sarah Chen stood there, holding her phone up. "I've been broadcasting everything you just said to the hospital's emergency system. Every room, every speaker." The police outside heard it all. The security team hesitated, looking between Price and the growing sound of police sirens. "Lower your weapons," James said, using his best boardroom voice. "It's over. Don't add murder to the charges." One by one, the security guards lowered their weapons. Price lunged for the fallen scalpel, but Frank knocked him out cold with a single punch. "The basement," Clara said suddenly. The message mentioned the usual place. "The secret room. It's where they meet buyers." James nodded to Frank. "Help Dr. Chen secure Price. Clara, with me." They raced to the basement, no longer hiding. Staff and patients watched them pass, whispers following in their wake. The hidden door was open when they arrived. Inside, they found Laura Thompson completing a transaction with a well-dressed man. Cases of surgical equipment and coolers lay ready for transport. When she saw Clara, Laura didn't look surprised. "I wondered when you'd figure it out," Laura said calmly. "Why?" Clara's voice broke. "Because they were going to kill me. Price gave me a choice. Join them or become another procurement. I chose to live." Laura's face softened slightly. "I wanted to tell you, but they were watching you, threatening you. I thought I was protecting you by helping them kill others." Police swarmed into the room before Laura could answer, ending the conversation. As they led Laura and the buyer away in handcuffs, Clara turned to James. "What happens now?" James looked around the hospital, his hospital, where so much death and corruption had festered under his trust. "Now we rebuild. Make this place what it was meant to be, a place of healing." Clara nodded slowly. "I'll help. Someone needs to make sure this never happens again." Above them, the hospital was coming back to life. Staff tending to patients, emergency crews securing evidence, the truth finally emerging into the light. The nightmare was over, but its shadows would linger in the halls of Carter Memorial for years to come. And in a maximum security cell, Alan Price smiled, knowing that somewhere out there, other hospitals, other doctors, were still playing their part in his network. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning.